the hell is all that firing over there, will you? General, will you call off this stuff, this war, while we're on, please?
He entertained generations of troops during wars, appeared in more than 50 movies, and hosted hundreds of television specials. NBC5's Marianne Ahern is live at the USO office now with the story of Bob Hope's Chicago connection, a story you may not know. Marianne?
Anna and Nacita, lots of memorabilia here at the USO office in Chicago because Bob Hope had a lot of Chicago connections, not just with the USO. It is right here that he changed his name from Leslie Townhope to Bob Hope during the Chicago vaudeville days.
1928, I stood in front of the Woods Theater building.
Bob Hope reminisced with Cup almost 20 years ago.
This is my town.
Hope says it was here in Chicago where he received his big break in the 1920s and a much-needed raise.
I got $25 for playing the West Englewood Theater.
Yeah, West Englewood.
And up to that time, I'd been making $10.
Yeah.
And when Charlie Hogan's booker said to me, how about $25? I said, yeah, that'll be fine. That'll be fine. Because I could see meat and potatoes and everything.
Yeah.
Now it is a vacant lot, but this was the site of the old Stratford Theater where Hope went from chorus dancer to comedian.
You know, I mentioned the Stratford and about 50 people applauded.
Yeah, I'll be there.
We're all senior citizens. I don't know who carried them in there, but I tell you, they were beautiful.
They remember him at the Pump Room, Bob Hope's picture from a New Year's Eve celebration. Restaurants like Papa Milano's, then at State and Division, recall how Hope loved a good late-night meal. And at the Navy Pier USO office, there are tributes and memories from those he gave so much joy to. This Army sergeant was in the audience in Frankfurt, Germany in the mid-'80s.
I call him a soldier. Matter of fact, today after I saw it on the news, I was wondering whether or not, maybe they won't bury him in Arlington or anything like that, because he really was a part of the military for so many years.
As this picture testifies from the Chicago Super Bowl victory, Bob Hope loved people.
And Chicago was a big pat on the back for Bob, so he always liked Chicago and he liked being here. And he knew the audiences here were as good as any across the country.
And I have one story else on Bob Hope I have to tell you. It is a personal story. Many years ago, I hate to tell you how many, at my own college graduation, I took it upon myself to write Bob Hope a letter to see if he would speak at our graduation. And one day in my college dormitory room, the secretary of the president of the university called me and said that he needed to see me, the president of the university, at 1 o'clock that afternoon. I thought, oh my goodness, what happened? I walked in and he said, great idea on Bob Hope, but next time you promise him an honorary degree without asking me, let's talk about this. Anyway, Bob Hope came. He spoke at my graduation. It was a wonderful time, and obviously, a lot of folks tonight are saying, thanks for the memories, Bob.
All right, Marianne, and he did get that honorary degree, right?
Absolutely.
Very innovative approach, Marianne. I like the way you think.
Thank you. Nice to have that personal story as well.
Now to the story that's touching hearts around the world, passing of a legend.
I just want to say we're in beautiful Thailand, ladies and gentlemen, where in October you get the monsoons, and in December you get me.
He entertained hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops, appeared in more than 50 films, and hosted hundreds of TV specials. Bob Hope died yesterday at the age of 100. NBC5's Marianne Ahern is live with a look back at his fondness for Chicago. Marianne.
Warner, we are at the USO office here on Navy Pier where there is a tribute to Bob Hope, one of the jackets worn on his tour back in 1987. And his Chicago roots do run deep because it is right here where Bob Hope got his first big break. Today it is a vacant lot, but here at 63rd and Halsted is where Bob Hope performed at the Stratford Theater in the 1920s. And his career took off.
You know, I mentioned the Stratford and about 50 people applauded.
Yeah, I'll be there.
We're all senior citizens. I don't know who carried them in there, but I tell you, they were beautiful.
As Bob Hope reminisced in 1984 with Cup, Hope recalls the lean days when he was aching to be discovered.
I starved here when I started. I used to stand, 1928, I stood in front of the Woods Theater building, looking across at those people eating and smacking my lips. I didn't have a donut.
Radio veteran Chuck Schaden says Hope had the ability to be a regular guy on the big stage.
You could count on Bob Hope to be funny. And he was a rapid-fire comedian. He had all the local gags. He had all the topical jokes. And he was very confident.
Hey, I'm going to be on the air 8 times this year. There'll be 7 comedy specials, and we're hoping that this is one of them.
Of course, over the years, Bob Hope's name became synonymous with comedy, success, and giving back.
He'll be missed, not only by the people of World War II, you know, Vietnam, Korea. He's been around, and he made sacrifices for his family, for us, and we appreciate it.
I know that Bob Hope would have been fantastic without the USO, but I really think the USO would not have been what it is today without Bob Hope's help.
And coming up in a few weeks, there will be a tribute to Bob Hope here in Chicago, the weekend of the Air and Water Show. That Saturday night, August 16th, there will be a special cruise. The USO Big Band will be in town and performing all of the best from the Bob Hope USO Tour days. Reporting live from Navy Pier, Marianne Ahern, NBC5 News.
And he's still making us smile. Thanks so much, Marianne. And in remembering Bob Hope tonight, we asked you, what's your favorite Bob Hope movie? And here are the results of tonight's NBC5 Daily Herald web question. It looks like any and all of the Road 2 movies are tops with Bob Hope fans out there. Nearly 50% of you voted those your favorites.
Beloved entertainment icon Bob Hope died late last night at his California home. Hope was born in London in 1903. His real name was Leslie Towns Hope. It was here in Chicago 75 years ago that he changed his first name to Bob while doing stand-up at the Southside's Stratford Theater. His career went from vaudeville to radio, movies to television. He was also well known, of course, for visiting American troops overseas. President Bush today called Hope a good man who entertained thousands of troops from different generations. Here to talk about Bob Hope, his career, and his Chicago connections, our Radio Hall of Fame member Chuck Schaden, whose Those Were the Days radio program has kept old-time radio alive for more than 30 years, on 90.9 FM, Saturdays from 1 to 5, public radio from Glen Ellen. Also, John McDonough, a Chicago-based contributor to the Wall Street Journal and National Public Radio. He has interviewed Bob Hope a few times, including back in '93 at Hope's home on the occasion of Bob's 90th birthday. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Bob Hope never revealed much of himself personally, did he? He was very good at avoiding any probing questions. Did anybody ever get to the real Bob Hope?
Well, he was a frustrating interview for that reason. But, you know, he was a celebrity of enormous dimension and consequence and over a huge length of time. And so he was a master at deflecting any questions that might present themselves as armor-piercing probes into his personal zone. He had a public persona to protect, and he knew how to do it.
And on the radio, Chuck, he had the most jokes per minute, but he never really became sort of the Jack Benny type on radio, did he?
Absolutely different than Jack Benny.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Hope had a 30-minute radio show, and he had enough material for 90 minutes. And they would have, his radio show was Tuesday nights at 8:30 Chicago time, and he would do a preview for a full audience on Sunday night with 90 minutes worth of material from all of his writers. And as they were going through the show, he would be ticking off which jokes got the biggest laughs. So finally, it would get down to 30 minutes worth of material, and then he would cram 34 or 5 minutes worth of material into that. And he was doing at least 6 laughs a minute during that 29 minutes and 30 seconds of the Pepsodent show. He was a rapid-fire comedian, and he just jam-packed, and the audience was there roaring every minute.
I did a journal piece once on his joke vault, and he had literally a joke vault. It was a cinder block room with a huge iron door on it.
He built another house there in California for his jokes, didn't he?
There was a small compound, and the joke vault was in a building that was at that time serving as his office and housed all his awards. But he had a bank of filing cabinets, and half of the filing cabinets filed the jokes according to topic. So you could look up smog, for example, and then there might be 30 different subcategories of smog, and you could get the joke. The other file were chronologically arranged. And Chuck, you're absolutely right, because I pulled out pieces of paper which were essentially the paper that came out of the typewriter of his joke writers. And there were X's through some of them and circles around others. And, I mean, the evidence is right there in black and white, right on the paper.
We have a bit of a monologue from Bob Hope on radio. Let's listen to a little bit of that right now.
Here I am back in California. Yes, sir, we did last week's show from Washington, D.C. and left just before the investigation. But I love to go to Washington, if only to be near my money. Not that I mind paying taxes, if they just let me feel it a little longer. And you know, with this fuel shortage, it's really cold in some of the hotels back there. I looked in my closet one morning, and my top coat was wearing my overcoat. I finally called the manager of the hotel. I said, "This is Bob Hope, and my room is freezing." He said, "I know. We didn't want you to spoil."
He had already been a star on Broadway before he hit on radio, correct?
Right. Did you hear that? The cadence of the laughs on that? Bang, bang, bang. 6 of them in a minute, easily like that. And Bob could not stand silence. He couldn't. He'd say, "And now here's our guest, Francis Langford, right here." He'd throw in this right here. "I want to tell you." He'd wait for the audience. "I want to tell you." He was faster than the audience sometimes.
He needed an audience.
Absolutely.
I remember in about 1990 or 91, I was out with a friend of mine, Chuck Stepner, who was, and he was doing. We were watching The Tonight Show, and after The Tonight Show was done, this was when Carson had it. It was over. The producer asked the audience to stay because Bob Hope was going to come on. We expected Bob Hope to be doing a monologue for his upcoming special. In fact, all he was doing was a 30-second piece of promotional copy, but he wanted to do it in front of an audience.
He needed the audience, which brings up the question, why did he really start going overseas and entertaining the troops?
Well, he was trying to do the best radio show he could from the NBC studios in Hollywood. And in the spring, in March of 1940, he got a call from March Field military base out there saying, "Why don't you bring your show and do your show next week from the field and entertain the servicemen?" The draft was on. It was not yet Pearl Harbor. It was spring. And he didn't want to go. He liked the comfort of the radio studio, but he decided, okay, we would go out there, and he got out there and they did the show, and it absolutely knocked him out. He never had an audience like that. Never on Broadway, never in vaudeville, never on radio. The crowd, the response of his stuff, because they were so glad to see an entertainer they knew. Well, he went back to the studio the next week, did a show from the studio. It was nothing in comparison to that as far as the audience was concerned. Between then and the end of World War II, Hope did 3 more shows from his studio, and the rest were all on the road, entertaining servicemen at military bases, Air Force bases, on ships anchored at San Diego or the Brooklyn Naval Yard, all over the country. And then after that, of course, he started going overseas with the Berlin Airlift in 1948, entertaining the troops over in Berlin. And then every Christmas, and then more than that, he was entertaining the boys.
How much of that was altruistic? How much of it was good, smart career moves?
I think he liked the audience, like Chuck said. I think it was a thirst for the audience. I think it became an important aspect of his television career, and something NBC came to value toward the late 50s, when it became kind of a national event. But I think it grew out of a natural instinct of this guy to find an audience that was responsive.
Well, he was the consummate showman. He knew what would make the audiences laugh because he added a lot of topicality to his humor, local jokes, surefire laugh getters, and he became the bridge between the home front and the war front during the war, and all for many of the years. And so the folks at home knew he was entertaining our boys, and our boy says, he's bringing us a little bit of home. So it grew together. He's a smart marketer. His family's been a smart marketing family. But you can't take anything away from him. He's a great entertainer.
Well, as you say, he did those local jokes for the troops over there, and even though they may not have made much sense to the people listening heard the reaction, and they were happy he was making the troops happy.
It's a funny thing as a listener. Now, as a kid, I listened to Bob Hope in the 40s doing these shows from an Air Force base someplace, and he'd make some remark about the local candy store, and he'd mention it was Maisie's Place. Well, the audience of GIs would roar because Maisie's Place was anything but a candy store, see? Now, he never said it was anything but a candy store. You kind of knew. And you kind of knew. You listened. Even as a kid, I laughed because of the rhythm of the laughter.
And he did the same thing on television.
Same thing.
We mentioned the Stratford Theater. Let's talk about his Chicago connections. He was having career problems when he played the Stratford in Chicago, wasn't he?
I think that was really a time in his career where he was seriously considering getting out of show business.
Are we talking about the 1930s?
We're talking about 1928. And he was seriously considering getting out of show business because nothing was happening. Everything seemed to be stalling on him.
Well, vaudeville was dying. Vaudeville was dying at this time, so he had to make a decision. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? He had made a few movies, real low-budget movies on the East Coast studios of some company, and there were 1 and 2 reelers, and they weren't very great. But he made those things, trying to figure out what to do. But he got to Chicago, and he found an audience that was, well, perhaps a predecessor of maybe that first military audience. He had a group of people here that loved what he was doing, his fast delivery, his sharpness, and even a little bit of local color that he would
It's hard to know. We don't have any recordings of what his performances were like then, but he said in his autobiography that he was standing in front of the Woods Theater, the old Woods Theater on Dearborn.
By the way, this is the ad from the Stratford. Go ahead, John, I'm sorry.
And some fellow, I think his name was Charlie Cooley, came up and offered him this job at the Stratford Theater. And it was 4 weeks, and it became 8 weeks, and 16 weeks, and it ended up as 6 months. And it was enough to reinvigorate his confidence, re-energize his contacts. Agents got interested in him. He never stopped working after that.
One of the Chicago connections he made over the years, Irv Cupp's in it, and right at the end of last year, Marianne Murciano and I visited Cupp at home and asked him about Bob Hope. Here's Cupp. What about Bob Hope? There's a story that you were sort of a test audience for Bob Hope sometimes.
Bob Hope and I were very close. Yeah. We had an arrangement where he would work out his skills and his scripts and so forth for his television shows, and then he'd call me on the phone and say, here, a couple of good stories I think maybe you can use, and they would appear in the column before they appeared on television. And I was very fond of Bob. I think of all the stars I knew, he probably was the best because I traveled so much with him. I made many trips almost around the world with Bob Hope. And he was always the same guy, always delightful, always fun, and always a few girls around at all times.
Did you maintain a relationship throughout the years with him?
Yeah.
With Bob Hope?
Yeah, for many years. And I made many trips with him. I went practically around the world with Bob Hope, and we were always very, very grateful to each other. And of course, I had a lot more to be grateful because he's Bob Hope. There's only one Bob Hope, thank goodness. And he was a magnificent person.
Do you think ultimately he's going to be best known, best remembered for the innovations he gave us in film? More than anything else?
No, he's going to always be remembered for his connection with the troops, I think.
I think it's going to be the films, because I think as the soldiers die off and as that generation dies off, that's going to be something that's ephemeral. I think, but the film is on celluloid. It's there forever. He will be remembered in the way that Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart are remembered today, not for the television and the broadcasting, but for that film work.
Yeah, it's funny because that's what Woody Allen says, pointing to the innovation of sort of breaking down the fourth wall and talking directly to the audience.
Which had its roots in vaudeville in many ways. Hope told me once in an interview that when a sketch is failing, you make the audience part of your act. And so it's essentially transplanting a piece of stagecraft from vaudeville into the movies. That's what those lobs over the fourth wall, I think, were really all about.
And by the time he was doing the television specials, especially in the last decade, some would say that really the only really good parts of those shows were the parts where something would go wrong and he would go off with the cue cards.
Sure, right. And those we never saw.
Well, they're around somewhere. Hopefully we'll see them now.
They are around, yeah.
Quickly, Chuck, Saturday, 1 o'clock. You've got some Bob Hope things for the radio audience, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll do a little something special for Bob Hope this Saturday, absolutely.
We'll be listening. WDCB 1 to 5, Saturday, 90.9. That's ingrained here. I'm a big fan, John.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Chuck.
Pleasure.
Live from Chicago, this is Fox News at 9.
For the memory
of rainy afternoon, swingy Harlem.
Comedian, actor, ambassador, legend. Bob Hope has died at the age of 100, leaving behind a century of memories. That story is first on Fox News tonight. Good evening, I'm Walter Jacobson.
And I'm Nancy Pender. Robin Robinson has the night off. Reporter Claudia Cowan begins our coverage from California. Claudia.
Tributes continue to pour in tonight as fans around the world mourn the passing of a Hollywood legend and a genuinely decent man. Bob Hope died at his home here in Toluca Lake with his wife and his children by his side. Giving some comfort to Bob Hope's legions of fans, his daughter said he passed away peacefully Sunday night at the age of 100 after a battle with pneumonia.
We all had our little time with him and time to say goodbye and, have for the last, several days when we knew that it was getting close to the end.
Condolences are pouring in from the average citizen to the highest reaches of government.
We'll mourn the loss of a good man. May God bless his soul.
The nation's most honored comedian is being remembered as a comic genius, a scratch golfer, a devoted husband and father, and a star in every category open to him, from vaudeville and radio to television and films. But perhaps his best role was as entertainer to the troops. From World War II to the Persian Gulf, Hope's breezy monologues and topical wisecracks boosted the morale of millions of GIs.
NATO, that's a Latin term meaning get your cotton-picking hands off my border.
Until age and ill health overtook him, he never stopped working to make people laugh. And now Bob Hope's fans are thanking him for the memories.
Thanks for the memory of rainy afternoon, swingy Harlem tune. Thank you.
Hope also had a storybook romance and 70-year marriage to his beloved wife, Dolores. She is grieving in private tonight along with other family and close friends. The funeral will be private as well. Memorial services will be held in about 1 month. In Toluca Lake, California, Claudia Cowan, Fox News, Chicago.
And Chicago was a make-it-or-break-it town for Bob Hope. He almost gave up entertainment early in his career. Mark Sapelsa is here now with more on his big break that led to the Bob Hope century.
Nancy, Walter, he didn't stay long in Chicago. With just a dime left in his pocket, a friend gave him a radio job here. The rest, as they say, was, oh, wait a minute. We here at Fox are lucky enough to have a fellow employee who witnessed a bit of Bob Hope history up close. All that and more right now.
Where are we? Diego Garcia, huh? That's a little embarrassing because we started out for Honolulu.
I'll work off the debt. I'll make more wine for you. I've got big feet. What grapes I can't trample on, I can sit on.
Happy to be here. I don't know where the hell we are, but I'm happy.
Mr. One-Liner was Mr. One-Punch back in the 20s, a failed boxer, a young, struggling entertainer, then that first Chicago radio job.
He always told me the stories about how he was, got his start here, and if he didn't get that job in radio here, he probably never would have made it.
This is dangerous. If this audience sees steak, they'll come right up here after it.
Oh, I don't know. They've seen ham all evening, and you're still here.
That's Mary Bilinski, our engineering coordinator here at Fox. For 2 years in the 1980s, she was Bob Hope's personal assistant.
I worked at his house.
Mary remembers a quiet, whistling, laid-back man who coveted the written joke.
And he had a huge vault in the office full of jokes.
She says joke writers were on call 24 hours a day for any event.
We typed everything on this special typewriter, no copies. He would review everything and circle all the ones he wanted. And then you had to put them in the vault by date and what show. Everything had to be last minute, follow the news, because that was very important to him.
We rarely eat off of this plate.
Bob Hope's early bread and butter was his stand-up routine. Some say he invented it. And Chicago radio historian Chuck Schaden says he hit it big by going local.
Maybe he'd get to know the name of the alderman or something like that, and he'd throw that into his act, and the people loved it.
I love the runway you have here. Great golfing country. Even the runway has 18 holes. I think
Hope has been good to Chicago. Chicago has been good to Hope. Their 4 children, all adopted from Evanston's adoption center, The Cradle, a favorite of Hope's wife, Dolores.
He said he always gauged his audience by how he did in Chicago, because he thought that was the best cross-reference between the West and the East Coast.
News at 9.
USO, I have some wonderful memories. Box lunches, yellow fever shots, and I've learned to say kale pectate in 7 languages.
He made us laugh in times of war, on the radio, TV, and movie screens alike.
As far as I'm concerned, this picture's over right now.
Bob Hope has died after living 100 years and earning a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Tonight, that star is covered in flowers as the man who made us laugh is remembered. Good evening, I'm Steve Sanders.
And I'm Allison Payne. Bob Hope gave us a century of memories. Tonight, we begin our coverage in Hollywood, where Frank Modick joins us live. Frank?
Yes, I'm standing in front of one of 4 stars that Bob Hope has here on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and a floral tribute has been set up here, and fans have gathered to mourn a Hollywood legend and to say thanks for the memories.
This is Bob. That wasn't my scotch that fell out of the plane, Hope.
Bob Hope began a lifetime of entertaining America on vaudeville in the 1920s, on radio and in movies in the 1930s, and television starting in the mid-1940s. He's best known for taking his comedy shows around the world to U.S. military bases, starting just before the U.S. entered World War II. And he continued to entertain our forces overseas for decades through the first Persian Gulf War.
I just want you boys to see what you're fighting for, that's all.
President Bush led the nation in mourning Bob Hope's death and expressing appreciation for all he did for American troops.
Today, America lost a great citizen. We mourn the passing of Bob Hope.
Johnny Grant, the honorary mayor of Hollywood, says Bob Hope was a great friend as well as a great talent.
He was a genius at simplicity. He could make that comedy look so easy, and dancing and everything else, that everybody thought they could do it.
Bob Hope's daughter Linda says her father received an amazing final send-off with his family at his bedside, and he died at the age of 100 with a smile on his face.
I don't think you could have asked for a more peaceful, beautiful death, and I think all the good vibes that he put out during his lifetime came back to take him up.
Thanks for the memory of sentimental verse, nothing in my purse, and chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse, how lovely it was.
Back here live in Hollywood now, you see Bob Hope's star, one of 4, adorned with flowers and American flags. The Hope family says there will be a private burial, and a public memorial service will be held on August 27th. Reporting live from Hollywood, Frank Motek, WGN News. Back to you.
All right, Frank, thank you. The great comedian had many Chicago connections. He was said to be very fond of the Windy City. And you might recall this scene from nearly 20 years ago. Then Mayor Harold Washington giving Bob Hope the key to the city.
WGN's Jackie Bang joins us with more on Bob Hope's Chicago connection. Jack?
Steve and Allison. His performances here date back more than 8 decades. Bob Hope certainly made his mark here, not just in the entertainment field, but with many friends. Bob Hope has a long history of entertaining in Chicago, back to the days of vaudeville, where he'd perform in places like the Stratford Theater on 63rd and Halsted in the late 1920s and 30s. Radio historian Chuck Schaden.
They loved his rapid-fire delivery. They loved his topicality. Even then, he was doing topical jokes about the neighborhood that he would be playing in.
Chicago's Museum of Broadcast Communications remembers Hope in its Hall of Fame.
And you know, with this fuel shortage, it's really cold in some of the hotels back there. I looked in my closet one morning and my top coat was wearing my overcoat.
I can't think of an entertainer who crossed so many different mediums and did it so well.
Chicagoans followed his career from vaudeville to radio to movies, television, and of course, in the war zones. Among his dearest friends, legendary columnist Irv Kupcinet, who knew Hope for 59 years. Kup talked with us by telephone and calls Hope's death heartbreaking.
It was just a sheer delight to be with Bob, because he always had something up his sleeve to make you laugh.
Tom Yenel knew Bob Hope through his father.
Bob Hope was one of my dad's favorites.
His father, Joseph, was the lead police escort for celebrities and politicians who came to Chicago. He looked forward to Hope's visits.
He was extremely cordial, and that's what my dad talked about, how it didn't make any difference if you're a doorman or a policeman or a dignitary. Hope treated everybody very nicely.
Tom Dreesen agrees. The comedian and Harvey native worked with Hope on and off for 30 years. He calls his friend the greatest stand-up comedian of our time and one of the best men you could ever know.
Bob Hope was the same 24/7. Bob Hope was Bob Hope. He was Bob Hope if you met him right now here talking on the golf course or he went on stage. He was the same guy, you know, just had a zest for life.
People said that over and over again. According to author Bill Zamey, Hope changed his name from Leslie to Bob right here in Chicago because he thought Bob had a more masculine ring. Hope would help raise money for several causes in the Chicago area. The Cradle in Evanston was very close to his heart. He is considered one of the Cradle's most famous adoptive parents.
Wow,
didn't know that. Didn't know it until today either.
And his jokes will live on. They're still funny.
You laughed at the top coat overcoat.
Jackie, thank you.